Alrighty, yo, what is going on, everybody? It's your boy, Mr. DDG94 here, back with another reaction video. And today, we finna react to when a team moves, who gets their history. Now, obviously, this will be like with teams like, for example, the Charlotte Bobcat, or the Charlotte Hornets and the New Orleans Pelicans, or what's another one? The goddamn Oklahoma City Thunder and the Seattle Supersonics. So yeah, this should be an interesting one. Without further ado, let's get right into it.
The Charlotte Hornets have one of the strangest franchise histories in sports. The original Charlotte Hornets became the New Orleans Hornets, who became the New Orleans Pelicans. Meanwhile, Charlotte got a new team called the Bobcats, and the Bobcats later became the Hornets. So Del Curry's franchise record of 701 games played, is that a Pelicans record? The Bobcats' 7-win season in 2012, is that the Hornets now?
Yes.
When you're trying to maintain a sports database, these aren't hypothetical questions. Every franchise leaderboard, every team page, and every all-time record has to have an answer. Because when teams move or change names, the history doesn't always follow the rules you'd expect.
Damn.
And the Hornets may not even be the weirdest example. So let's dive into one of the strangest questions in sports. When a team moves, who gets the history? The answer depends on the league, the team, the city, and sometimes a decision made years after the games were played. And once you start looking closely, you realize sports history isn't as fixed as it seems. Most of the time, though, there is a simple rule. A team moves, and its history moves with it. And most of the time, that's exactly how it works. The Dodgers still count the championships they won in Brooklyn. The Lakers still count the championships they won in Minneapolis, even if some people think they shouldn't.
I mean, it's still the Lakers.
A's still count the championships they won in Philadelphia, Oakland, and wherever they're playing by the time you're watching this. One franchise, different cities, one history. Simple. And baseball gives us a perfect modern example of this. In 2005, the Montreal Expos moved to DC and became the Washington Nationals. If you visit the Nationals page on Baseball Reference, you'll find seasons played in Montreal. If the Nationals are a category on Immaculate Grid, Expos players count. The franchise leaderboards for the Nationals include players like Steve Rogers, who spent their whole career in Montreal and never played a game in Washington. Nobody debates which city owns the stats. The Expos became the Nationals. Case closed. But in 1995, one league decided not to follow that rule. And in doing so, they opened Pandora's box. That was the year that the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore. Typically, that would have been straightforward. The players moved, the coaches moved, the history moves too, right? Not this time. Instead, the NFL made a unique decision. The Browns' stats, records, and history would remain in Cleveland, even though there wasn't a team there anymore.
Damn.
Meanwhile, the Baltimore Ravens, who were literally just the Browns with a different name, would effectively begin life as an expansion team. Weird, right? The entire team moved, but their history didn't. The NFL separated the team on the field from the team in the record books. The Ravens got the roster, and the Browns' past was put on ice until they came back 4 years later. This was relatively unprecedented, and left fans with a ton of questions, like, what even is a team? The Browns and Ravens had inadvertently exposed something important. That leagues have the power to assign and reassign a team's history. And nowhere is that more obvious than in Charlotte. When the Hornets relocated from Charlotte to New Orleans in 2002, everything worked exactly how you would expect. The franchise moved, and the history went with it. But 2 years later, NBA basketball returned to Charlotte with an expansion team called the Bobcats. At that point, the split was clean. The old Hornets history lived in New Orleans, and the Bobcats could start writing their own record books in Charlotte. But then the Hornets decided to change their name. At one point, they even asked the Utah Jazz to return their name to the city it started in. You know, the city actually known for jazz, but Utah declined. So in 2013, the New Orleans Hornets...
They was better off doing a rebrand, because Utah Jazz don't make no sense. To this day, it don't. The Utah was better off just being the Mountains, the Mounties, or maybe they become the Pelicans, or something of that nature. The Utah Rebels, something like that. And then New Orleans gets New Orleans Jazz, which makes sense. Charlotte goes back to being the Charlotte Hornets. Makes sense.
Became the New Orleans Pelicans. And with the Hornets name available again, the Bobcats pounced, bringing Hornets basketball back to Charlotte the following year. But the NBA didn't just stop with a name change. Instead, they essentially rewrote the entire franchise family tree. As part of a deal with the NBA and the Pelicans, the original Charlotte Hornets history from 1988 through 2002 was transferred back to this new Hornets team, with the Pelicans only keeping their New Orleans era records. Think about what that means.
That makes sense.
The games didn't change, the box scores didn't change, the players didn't change, but the ownership of the records did. Overnight, franchise leaders, playoff appearances, win totals, and historical records were all reassigned. For fans, it made emotional sense. Charlotte got the Hornets back. But for record keepers, this was a massive bookkeeping exercise.
So Chris Paul and Anthony Davis are arguably the best players of the Pelicans' history so far. That's crazy.
If you're a sports database like us, franchise leaderboards have to be rebuilt, pages have to be updated, every historical record has to know where it belongs. It's a reminder that sports history isn't just something that exists, it's something that's maintained, and something that the leagues decide how to maintain. Which brings us to hockey. The NHL somehow managed to create an even stranger version of this problem. In the 1990s, the Winnipeg Jets moved to Arizona, changing their name to the Coyotes. A perfectly normal relocation story. Like dozens of teams before them, the franchise moved, and the history moved with it. The Coyotes' record books were, and still are, led by Jets players in many categories. In fact, players from the Winnipeg era make up the top 15 highest point-scoring seasons in Coyotes history. Then in 1999, the NHL added a brand new team in Atlanta called the Thrashers. The Thrashers had a pretty mediocre 11-season run in Atlanta before being relocated themselves to Winnipeg, where they would rename themselves the Jets. On its face, this looks like a pretty similar situation to the Hornets. An expansion team comes into town and adopts the name of the departed original franchise. But unlike the Hornets, the original Jets' history did not return to Winnipeg.
Wow.
Much to the dismay of their fans. The new Jets inherited the Thrashers franchise history, while the Coyotes would retain the history from the original Jets.
That's crazy.
Then it got even stranger. In 2024, the Coyotes packed their bags and headed for Salt Lake City, becoming the team we now know as the Utah Mammoth. But this time, the collective 44 seasons of Arizona and Winnipeg baggage stayed behind, like what happened in Cleveland with the Browns. So now the NHL has a team in Winnipeg called the Jets that doesn't officially own the stats of the original Jets, and a team in Utah that inherited Arizona's players and operations, but not all of Arizona's historical records.
That's crazy.
I'm sure your head is spinning by now with all of these Jets and Coyotes and Hornets, but the point is not just that it's confusing, but that the NHL chose a different route than the NBA. Charlotte got its old basketball identity back, records and all. Winnipeg got its old team name back, but not its old history.
That's crazy.
Brings us to perhaps the most fascinating unresolved case of all. The Seattle Supersonics became the Oklahoma City Thunder in 2008. Officially, the franchise history and the stats moved with them. That means Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Ray Allen, and the 1979 NBA championship are all technically part of the Thunder's franchise history. However, there has long been an understanding that if Seattle receives another NBA franchise, the Sonics history could potentially return, which puts the Sonics in a strange middle ground. The history is technically attached to Oklahoma City, but many fans still think of it as Seattle's, and if a future expansion team arrives, that history could once again be reassigned, just like the Hornets.
As it should.
Makes the Sonics the perfect final example, because their story reminds us that this question isn't always permanently settled. This video isn't really about the Hornets or the Browns or the Jets or the Expos. It's about the fact that sports history is far less fixed than many of us realize. Sometimes history follows the franchise. Sometimes it stays with the city. Sometimes it leaves and it comes back, and sometimes it waits. Every league has had to answer the same question. Who owns the past? Most fans never notice these decisions. They live quietly inside record books, franchise leaderboards, and databases like ours. But every once in a while, a team moves, a city gets a franchise back, or an old name returns, and suddenly we get a glimpse behind the curtain. Because sports aren't just about keeping score, they're also about keeping track of history. And it turns out that can be a lot more difficult.
Alrighty, that was an interesting video. I didn't know that. That's crazy. A team is restored or revitalized back into the league, but they can't get their stats back. That's kind of crazy. I think the NHL needs to give them they history back. You know what I'm saying? Since they're a team, I think that's fair for that place. Since that's the place where all that stuff happened, give it back. Just like in New Orleans. Just like with the Charlotte. I think Charlotte deserves their history. Charlotte got their history back, but they said the New Orleans portion of the Hornets, y'all can keep that. Just give us the Charlotte shit back. Like, y'all can have Chris Paul and Anthony Davis, and they don't have no ties to us. That's fine. That's cool. Y'all can have that. That's y'all history. That's when y'all move. But we just want our shit back from Charlotte. We want our Lonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson, Dale Curry, and Muggsy Bogues eras back to go along with our shitty ass Bobcats era. yeah. Anyways, though, that's just gonna about do it for this one. I'll see y'all in the next video. Till then, deuces.